The car is a metaphor for Elvis, as a metaphor for the human condition.
Traveling north to find you. Train wheels are beating the wind in my eyes. Don't even know what I'll find when I get to you.
I appreciate your move.
Okay.
Siamo con Eugene Jarecki a Cannes nelle proiezioni speciali con Promised Land. Eugene, come hai avuto questa idea che la vita di Elvis potesse essere letta come una metafora della storia recente degli Stati Uniti?
Well, the original spirit for the film came from a feeling of heartbrokenness that I perceived all around America when I was traveling with a previous film. My film, The House I Live In, which was about America's war on drugs, put me in about 40 states, and I was talking to audiences of all kinds in schools and prisons and community centers. And when I took those conversations in, it collectively seemed to sort of signify a change in the way the American people saw the American dream. There was a profound sense that the American dream was a kind of broken promise, and something that might have been beautiful, that was supposed to be beautiful, but that hadn't gotten to that place in the way people hoped. And I got the idea at that time, sort of randomly, that in many ways Americans, all of us taken together, were a little bit like Elvis, that we had been young once, we had been beautiful, we had been full of promise, we had risen very quickly, too quickly. And I could see this metaphor start to unfold of the way he and his country moved in parallel. And of course we know that Elvis's story did not end well, and I was watching the American story move toward pressures and forces that seemed frightening to me in terms of the health of a democracy. So whereas I saw Elvis's authenticity as an artist, and then ultimately his life compromised by capitalism, consumerism, materialism, addiction, so many aspects of the broken condition of his life, I saw all of those things afflicting America as a country. And that gave birth to this idea of examining America through the lens of this metaphor. Yeah.
Sono incuriosita dalla dimensione mitica ed epica che hai instillato nel film. Cosa hanno a che vedere Moby Dick ed Elvis Presley?
Sure, well, that was just one of those lucky things that happens to you when you're making a movie. I love Herman Melville and I love Moby Dick as a very iconic book in American culture and in the idea of the rugged individualism of the American dream and the chance for everyday people to rise to great heights and do extraordinary things. Herman Melville himself as a writer is that. Ishmael, the sailor on the boat, is that. So Moby Dick has always been part of the American idea, part of the American ideal. And just by chance, one of the people we interviewed, Greil Marcus, taught me something I had not known, which was that on the very night Elvis first appeared on television on the Steve Allen Show, which is just one of our talk shows at the time, on another show, the biggest show in the country, Ed Sullivan made the mistake of doing a whole hour on the new film Moby Dick with Gregory Peck and a bunch of actors at that time by John Huston. And he expected to have a huge night with Moby Dick because all the best actors were in it. And meanwhile, this kid from Memphis, Tennessee, on another channel blew them out of the water. And as Greil Marcus, the writer in the film, says, you know, Elvis killed Moby Dick that night. And what's interesting is that, you know, you fast forward many years later, and Elvis is in 1968, he's having his big moment of comeback. And he's been out of the public affection for a long time. People thought Elvis had lost it. He'd become sort of sold out in Vegas, and he'd done these crappy B movies in Hollywood, and he'd lost his edge. And he comes back on the comeback special, and for anybody who saw it, he was just drop dead beautiful, fantastic singing. The music was exhilarating. He was back to the old Elvis, and people all over the country saw this amazing moment of comeback, and they thought, Elvis is back. And on that night, in the middle of the comeback special on national television in front of millions of people, for some reason nobody can understand, Elvis himself seemed to understand this Moby Dick metaphor in his life, and he grabbed the microphone stand at the height of his exhilaration at his comeback, and he held it over his head like a harpoon and shouted, "Moby Dick," in the middle of the show. Americans are constantly getting knocked down and they get up again, like that famous Chumbawamba song, "I get knocked down but I get up again." That's part of the American story. It's part of the human story, by the way. It's just that America's good at branding. So anything that's ever been good in history, we take it, wrap it in an M&M's wrapper, and then say we made it. Same with Coke. Coke was drunk by people in Mayan and prehistoric societies for millions of years. Then we put it in a bottle, wrap it up shiny, call it Coke. So we brand dreams that everyday people have. And one of the dreams we brand is bound up in that comeback idea that you see in 1968 for Elvis Presley.
Tutti i personaggi famosi che sono intervenuti nel documentario li avevi contattati prima? Sto pensando anche a tutte le band che suonano nella Rolls Royce di Elvis durante il viaggio.
We met all of that happened along the way. Nobody, even Ethan Hawke, we stumbled into Ethan Hawke early on and met him and talked to him about the movie, and he expressed an unbelievable knowledge of Elvis and had gone through his own personal awakening of the meaning of Elvis Presley to his life, to American life, to his daughter's life. Whether it was Ethan or Ashton Kutcher or any of the other famous folks in the movie, Emmylou Harris or Chuck D, all of them had a different part of not just Elvis's story, but a different part of the American story to tell. And we tried to weave those into a tapestry of the American family. Well, do you think we're in decline?
No. I think we're stagnant. That's all.
You think America's had better days?
Oh, yeah. Hey, Eugene, I grew up with the great lie of all, you know. Work hard, you can get ahead. Work hard, you can get ahead. It was a lie. They lied to everybody.
Dopo questo lungo viaggio attraverso gli Stati Uniti ti sei fatto un'idea di dove l'America sia diretta?
It's changing every day. And one of the exciting parts about being alive right now is one of the terrifying parts. We are on a knife's edge of seismic change. The election of Donald Trump, which is could be viewed surely as a critical tragedy in the history of mankind, and I think should be viewed as no less than that. But it's a symptom of problems we have. No country in its right mind, no healthy country, would elect such a person to be a public servant. This is a person who's never had a moment of public service in their life. They're a private servant. They serve nothing but their own interests, and they expect others to serve their interests. So when a country is so broken and desperate in its heart and in its soul that it would choose this kind of abuse for itself, that's really a cry for help. And that's why I tell you, I don't know where it's going. And it's hard to make a movie about something that's a moving target. So we had to stay at a high altitude and watch all these situations show us what they might portend in the future. The American dream didn't get broken by Donald Trump. The American dream got so broken that people were willing to elect somebody like Donald Trump.
Pensi che sarà utile questo passaggio a Cannes per aumentare la consapevolezza delle persone a cui ti rivolgi?
I hope so. I think Cannes is two things at the same time, to my rather naive perspective here. It's my first film here. But I understand a bit about the movie business, and this is a place that is both a concentration of serious love of cinema and serious artistic integrity. And it's also, as you look around you, a corporate branding machine full of some of the worst values that I deal with in the film. And I'm very aware of that. With all my movies, I've always had to navigate working in the movie business. How do you make movies about the downfall, the disaster of capitalism to democracy and human dignity, and show your work in environments that are entirely driven by that same capitalism? It's a very complicated, it's not impossible, and you must do it because you must stand up. You know, the man who stood in front of the tank on Tiananmen Square was still standing on the asphalt laid by the Chinese government. He didn't say, I need a new road for this. He has to work with, to a degree, the structure that is set before him. I work to a degree with the structure I've set before me. If I said, I'm only going to show my films where they do not have Christian Dior ads, or they do not have every 5 seconds paparazzi flipping pictures of the next plastic surgery fashion model who has suddenly become front page news, if I said I won't go near that stuff, I would miss part of the strange way that ideas are leveraged into the imagination of the public. I mean, I'm going to, at some point in the next 20 minutes, use my cell phone to try to promote my human rights movie while touching the very material that children have been mining in Africa under slave conditions. So I'm going to use that slavery to try to undo some of the ideology that produces that slavery. That's a contradiction, but it may not be a contradiction. It may be the best we've got at the moment because the system is so pervaded by these forces.